you're spending money out the nose, and you're like just can't even look at your phone, and like it's just this really awful, terrible experience, right? And so I think it becomes a lot easier once you stay true to your authentic self. Fractional general counsel is the answer. I mean, it's got the flexibility, it's got the stability.
We are back with the What You're About podcast with me, Chad Abood. And this is going to be our final kind of formal interview of season 2. Because we've got, as we're recording this, we've got the Future of Law Summit coming up, and we're going to have a couple really cool episodes and clips coming out of that summit. So more to come on that in a couple of weeks. But we wanted to close it out with a really, really special interview. And when I was thinking about the whole point of this season, this collab with Goodlawyer, it's all about designing a career that is super meaningful for you so that you can bring the gifts that you've got, deploy them towards opportunities that feel fun and bring you growth, but also allow you to live a life that really feels resonant for like what you care about in that phase. And so when I think about someone who's just doing that right now in all forms, living fractional general counsel life. We were talking right before this about some of the mandates that you're working on and how meaningful and fun they are for you in terms of the work you're doing, but also the leadership teams that you're learning with and from. And also, I know that you are no stranger to living a life of adventure and fun and exploration that is only possible because you had the courage to design your career so that you could do that. So, for everyone that doesn't already know him, Nolan Ritzel, so glad that you joined. You were doing all of the things before you chose this life. You were doing all the things that makes everyone proud when you tell someone that you're going to be a lawyer. You're a Biglaw, BLG, you're AGC of Shopify. You would think a lot of people would just shut it down after that. You're a partner at a global insurance solutions practice. You're a general counsel to other tech companies. It was everything that could go on the holiday card saying, I did it. I'm a success. Everyone believe me. You were doing all the things, my friend. And then you took a left turn. And I am really, really curious because we've had some fun conversations, but we haven't had enough time to really dig into this part. So I want to learn it in real time, which is like, that journey of how you go from like all of the things that we were taught as kids and in law school and from our peers that like, oh, if you could just be, at the top of Biglaw, if you could be at the top of a massive tech brand, then you've made it. And then you walked away and did something totally different. And so can't wait to unpack the journey with you. Thank you for sharing your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I think I sort of went through those same motions, like I thought that big law partner track was the end all be all, and sort of you start to get close and you're almost touching it and you realize, hey, maybe this isn't going to fulfill or scratch that itch the way that I thought it would. And, I was like, well, maybe an exec role would sort of do that. And so I had always sort of had that moving target. And I think it was only over the course of having and collecting those really incredible experiences where I was able to realize, hey, like there's a way to build this in sort of a Lego block type way to really, really fit what I wanted to do and what felt meaningful to me, I guess, what aligned with sort of my personal values. So
you were right. I love that Lego block. I'm gonna remember that. That might work its way into the title of this episode. You were actually writing about this. You don't post a lot on LinkedIn.
No.
But you posted about a month ago on some of this. You were doing some reflections. You had gone on a trip to Montreal with some of the Goodlawyer folks and Brett and Tom, and you were on the plane coming back and you wrote a post. There may have been some strong arming, but I know you still wrote it. And you were kind of reflecting on this whole part about like a little bit of the journey. And so I'm actually curious, when you were drafting that post, sitting on the plane, coming back, thinking about kind of everything that you've gone through so far and where you are now, like, what were you thinking? Like, how were you feeling about when you look back on some of those like huge jobs at massive brands, and now you're doing something that not a lot of people have the courage to do? Some people think like that's not what you should do with your legal career. Like, What were your reflections on that when you were kind of marinating on it all on that flight back from Montreal?
I think it was sort of like this eye-opening experience where, you sort of see where you're sitting and you see what maybe the public perception is, because I think you're totally right. I told people that I work for Goodlawyer, I work for, independently, and it sort of is a completely different response than what you get when you say, hey, I'm at Shopify, or hey, I'm at Biglaw. And um, I was always curious to me, because you think about the experience of being on this plane where you're with a meaningful team, you're meeting incredible clients, you have this flexibility, you have this freedom, it's hitting all of your main core values, and it's a bit of a head scratcher. Like, why do people not see how amazing this is? And I think that's part of why I felt compelled, not just by Brett's pestering, but a personal sort of drive to sort of get that messaging out there and sort of be able to stand behind something that is actually really, really powerful, and that lots of people, I think, just haven't even realized exists. So
Yeah, I think actually that's a big one. So I'm glad you talked about that because, when I think about, I purchased fractional legal services when I was at Indigo, when I was GC at Audience View. And so I was used to it as a buyer, but I think and know that many peers don't even know it exists, separate from what they think about it. They don't even know it exists. And so that also tells you that the lawyers who might want to be a version of what you're doing don't even know it exists. And so when you were, GC of these tech companies and DC Bank and AGC at Shopify, like, did you know that being a fractional lawyer was even a possibility? Like, how did you come upon it?
yeah, I have a close connection with
Yeah.
Brett, so I obviously sort of knew that that was percolating, but they hadn't quite gotten to this product fit with the fractional general counsel product, and so I didn't really know it existed, or what kind of gap it could fill, or what it would look like being a part of it. I mean, sort of as an end user, when I was at those larger institutions, I was thinking about ways to get alternate legal services, but never really thought about what it would be like providing them. So I think it was sort of a matter of, taking my experience from Biglaw and saying, hey, what did I like about this? Taking my experience from in-house and saying, hey, what did I like about this? And then thinking about what's the best way to marry those two. And if you actually dissect it like that, fractional general counsel is the answer. I mean, it's got the flexibility, it's got the stability, it's got sort of every element, it's got client engagement, it's got all the best parts of both worlds, really, and it's sort of great for both the client and for the lawyer itself, for lawyer themselves. So
And so there's the logical piece that tells you, okay, so if you could design your own career and choose your mandates and do the type of work that you want and still get paid really well, which I actually want to talk about the financial piece a little bit later too, because I think as lawyers we are fully trained to be like, whatever number you get billed at, higher equals your better, when really nobody ever told us about how much money goes in your bank account for your effort. So we'll get there. We'll get there. But what was the biggest barrier, or were there none, for you to say, I'm going to leave this like really high profile in-house role and do this fractional thing? Like, for folks that are listening to it saying like, I don't know, man, AGC at Shopify, like, you're going to leave that? Like, what was the barriers that you had to get over yourself? Was it like just a values alignment that made so much sense to you? Were you trying to live a really flexible life because you wanted to travel? Like, what were the biggest fear factors for you that you really had to marinate on?
I think there's just that element of like uncertainty, because you basically have to go from getting that cushy paycheck, or being an employee at a company, to, and now I have sort of maybe a corporation that I got to deal with, and now I got to deal with accounting. And so I think there's a lot of those things that sort of seem pretty scary right out of the box. Like, I got to market for myself, I got to do the invoicing. And so seeing the ability for Good Lawyer to fit into a lot of those sort of pieces, which really do give me the late night heartburn, I think that made it a lot easier to make that jump. But I think that's really all it is. It's sort of jumping from something that's known and that's been told to you is the only one of the only two ways to do it, to taking that leap and saying, hey, past convention doesn't really dictate what my current experience is or what my future should be, right?
And so were you always like this independently confident to just like, oh, well, if it logically makes sense, then okay, two and two, I'll just do the thing? Or was there any like pure kind of fear or stress that you had? Because I think that's a real thing for a lot of lawyers. So like, even if it logically made sense, where it's like, oh, so at a platform like Goodlawyer, there's like 170 lawyers, so I'll still have community and I'll get discounted practical law and they'll like be a sales and lead engine for me, and these amazing brands, I can work for them. Like all the logic pieces are there, but there still is the kind of fear around the social pressure, whether it's from family or peers. Did any of that resonate for you, or do you always just march to beat of your own drum and you're like, well, I don't really care what you have to say because this works best for me?
Honestly, I think there was an element of that. Like I'd be lying if I pretended I was above those sorts of thought processes. But I think, you start talking to your network of lawyers that are in big law, and you get sort of the range. You get the people who are really, really poo-pooing it, and you get the guys who are like, hey, that sounds interesting, that sounds different, and they don't have anything sort of negative to say about it. So I sort of had the range of that, and I really had some major naysayers, but I think that almost emboldens you because you look at the way that they're living their lives and you're like, huh, what is he uncomfortable about here? What is the source
Mm.
of his sort of aggression against this sort of concept of doing your own thing? And you think about that value alignment, and I'm like, man, I think this is almost a stronger indicator that I really am making the right choice. And maybe people like that will eventually sort of come across the fence or sort of see the light. But until then, like I'm happy to take the work myself and enjoy the lifestyle and march to the beat of my own drum for sure.
Okay, but there's a thread I got to pull on there because this is not the most common thing for any human, I think, is you were using their reactions as data points, not as commandments.
Yeah, I think
That's
that's
a big deal, man. Like it took me a long time to get there. Like, so if you, a lot of us, if you're trained in professional services, or like I was a big sports guy, which has like a very similar kind of training path around authority and discipline and dedication and like following the command, is when someone's ahead of you in the ladder of experience and they have a reaction that indicates negativity, that feels like a commandment to be like, I shouldn't do that thing. And what you just said was you heard it and you didn't take it as a commandment. You like bounced it off the filters that you had for your life around like, do I think I can make good money? Will I have a flexible life? Will the work be interesting? And then you said like, I still think I have those things. That person's very against it. That's interesting. I wonder what that's about for them.
yeah.
That's a very different way of thinking about it. Have you always been like that? Like, have you always been kind of like pretty centered in your values? And when people have a very different reaction to something you care about, you don't just like run with their emotion, you kind of question it. Have you always been like that?
I never really thought of it that way, but I guess so. I mean, I sort of look back on my career and the decisions that I made and the ways that I made them, and I think that does ring true for sure. Yeah.
It's a really strong characteristic. So I had to build it. I didn't have it. And so I'm sure for me still it's not nearly as strong as yours because it sounds very innate in you. What I found was I often had a very strong voice inside me telling me like how you feel about this thing or what you want to do, like that makes so much sense for you. But when I would feel the pressure from anyone who's like an authority above me, I would feel a lot of pressure to do the version that they were doing because I was like, well, they're further ahead and they're successful on all these external metrics. That seems to be the way that life works. So I guess I'm doing that, even though I didn't want to. And it actually just took a lot of pain to realize, like, boy, I'm just living every day in a world of hurt. I could do it, I could do the work, and people were paying me and saying, great job, you're doing the work, but I didn't care. And it took a really long time for me to, I think, just by exhaustion, stop hiding what I actually cared about. And then when it would just come out because I was just tired because I was working so much and I didn't really love the work. And so I was cognitively exhausted. And then I started getting some reactions of like, oh, Chad, that's pretty cool. That's different. And it took that actually for me to get to this place where I think it sounds like you've almost always been, which is like, I know what I care about. I know what matters to me. And if you have a very different reaction, that's a cool data point that I'll think about, but it's not determinate of how I live. And so that's cool, man. That's a very cool journey that you've, thankfully always had for yourself.
Well, that's funny, and I sort of reflect upon, the employers that I had, the managers that I have, and I feel like that's probably a point of why I would always butt heads. It's just sort of being authentic, but at the same time, I think it sort of wins you a lot of favor, and it sort of makes you produce and sort of present yourself to the world in a way more effective and way more impactful way. And And I think that is a part of why I've done sort of well, or and sort of had also that sort of tension at most of my jobs. Actually, it's interesting that you point that out.
There's something about the accuracy of it. And so I think about it like a sales funnel when you're like going for different opportunities. And so whether you're applying for a job, which is like you're selling yourself one time to get a job, or you're in a fractional model, and so you're interviewing for different mandates kind of periodically, or you're just running your own business and so you're selling all the time. I think about how much it matters to really be clear about what you care about, what you value, and how you like to create impact. Because of this, it's more accurate to win business. Yes, it makes a smaller top of funnel. Everyone thinks you got to have the biggest top of funnel in order to win the game. I don't really care about top of funnel. All I care about is conversion rate on great fits, because you got to have conversion rate, and then you got to have conversion rate on the right fit, because that creates for like a long tail engagement. And I really feel like you're winning the game of life and business if you have a great conversion on great fits. I don't care how many people are in the top of funnel. And so it's like now for you, you're doing these like periodic mandates as different fractional GC opportunities come up. How do you think about when you're in those opportunities? And because you're interviewing more than most lawyers do in a sense, right? Because every 3 6 months, 12 months, as the mandates change, you're talking to another tech company to see if it's a good fit. So you actually interview pretty regularly in a way. How do you feel about that part of it? Because that's another piece that I think some lawyers don't love. Lawyers don't always love interviewing. And so how did you get through this part where it's like, I got to talk about my value, I got to talk about my experience, I got to talk about how I like to create impact, I've got to do it in a way that that business cares about, I got to mix confidence and humility, like, and I'm going to do this regularly. How does that part of being a fractional GC feel for you?
I mean, to be honest, I feel like if you're in big law, or even in sort of private practice generally, you're trying to win business constantly, whether it's from internal partners or if it's external with external facing clients. So I feel like you are in a sense interviewing all the time,
Mm.
maybe not in the same formal way, but I think it becomes a lot easier once you stay true to your authentic self, right? I mean, if you're just saying things that come to mind and they're true to how you feel and what you experience, I mean, it's hard to get tripped up, And so I did find at the end of the day, though, it sort of it distinguished some of your options, right? Like you don't get all the interviews, you don't get all the jobs because you're being authentic and you're saying, hey, this is the types of stuff I like to do. You're not going to pretend to be who exactly they want you to be. I think that sort of requires you to build a bit of humility in getting rejected from some mandates, but the ones that you win and the ones that buy in and they align with what you want, you're right. Like that's a sticky, enduring relationship that you can have for a significantly longer period of time, and it's a lot more enjoyable. And I think that's sort of the key, right? Like it's why pretend that you're this personality and then have to suffer through working with people that you don't want to work with or that you don't align with, right? Like I think it's become clear to me over all of my experiences that that's one of the best things is working with people that see you for you and that you can be authentic with, and that's how you get to better decisions, better product, better fit.
I love the intentionality about it. So, this was something that I thought about a lot too when I left being a GC to like build my advisory and coaching business. Was I really like the intentionality of two parties choosing each other like all the time.
Yeah,
Whereas I feel like you're right, as a full-time employee, you're still like making the choice and kind of winning business internally, or winning at least the relationship internally. But I feel like it can start to feel a little lazy. There's
totally.
like just this feeling of like, we're all here. And people almost get negative about being at work. It's like, no one's forcing you to be here. You can leave anytime. But it's just a mental, it's a natural mental way sometimes for a lot of folks when you become inside an org. Whereas I feel like being a consultant, a vendor, a fractional person, like you're forced into the intentionality of thinking like, do I want to take on this mandate? What exactly do they want? What do I want to do? How much time do they want? What's the nature of these people? Like you're always asking the questions and then asking yourself whether it's a fit. And I really feel like that gives you a life where you feel like you're choosing all the time. And for me, like a massive value I've always had is like agency and discovery. And so it really speaks to me to like have the chance to like assess and choose all the time. Is that something for you that like you found as a difference from building relationships every day inside an org versus like more of a mandate structure in your work now?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say so. It's sort of a double-edged sword, I guess, right? Because you're always sort of working to get that renewal, and so maybe that's why my parents are so keen for me to get a full-time employment job. But yeah, you're right. I think it sort of makes you reevaluate the relationship, and if it doesn't serve you anymore, you have that flexibility, you have that sort of platform, and you have that agency to say, okay, I think maybe we're at the point where we're no longer adding value to each other's lives, whether it's on a legal function or whether it's just an interpersonal thing, and sort of swapping that out and finding them someone that fits the new brand or the new scope or the new direction that they want to go, and then you get to find something that works for you. And I think there's some incredible power and it's a bit scary, but there's incredible freedom and power to it for sure.
So you said something there that I imagine lots of lawyers who are listening are stressed out about. So say so far they're like, okay, checkbox on intentionality, checkbox on cool jobs, checkbox on Nolan's living his best life and he's traveling around and he's on the thing and he's going to Montreal and he's being reflective and sounds like he lives in a cool condo, so he's doing good. Everything seems good. His parents, though, are on his back about that full-time job. And even if you were joking, that's a real thing for a lot of people. And so at some point along the way, I imagine someone close to you raised an eyebrow when you said, I'm not going to do this great full-time GC thing anymore, which everyone was writing on the postcards around holiday time saying like, and our Nolan, he's GC of his company. And now they're trying to figure out how to describe you. How did you face that, right? Because I think that's where a lot of people could use different data points of support of like, how did you deal with it when you got that hard question of, what are you doing?
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I got to give my parents some credit because, of course, they were the A types. You know, they were sort of driving me to get the best job, get something stable, get something with a pension, all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, they sort of deferred to my view and understanding of the corporate life. They were both in the sciences space working with government. So they have no idea about the corporate world. They have no idea about law. And so I think they sort of, I have the benefit that they defer to me on that. They say, Nolan, are you sure? Are you sure you want to do this? I mean, you probably know what you're talking about, but are you sure you really want to do this? And it's hard. It honestly is probably one of the hardest things to face. I think you're right. It's and I can imagine it being a lot worse for people who don't have people, their parents who defer to their judgment, because it's hard enough for me as is. And on every phone call, believe me, they're like, hey, so how many mandates do you have? Oh, did you swap one out? Yeah, and so they're always very curious about how that's looking for me. And I mean, that's what parents are for, right? They're going to be the ones who are more risk adverse. And if you have the ability and flexibility to sort of take that on and take that dive on your own, um, do it, because maybe your parents will see the value once those paychecks start rolling in and those incredible mandates start landing on your desk, because they are impressed by the caliber of clients that I'm working with, the flexibility, the understanding. These are all things that are just objective, and they can't argue with that. Those are
Yeah.
those are things in their face. I know parents like to just ignore a lot of data points and empirical evidence, but when it's there in their face, it's hard to deny.
Well, and I'm sure that they see like how you feel about your career, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
that's a
yeah.
big one. Like there's a lot of folks, and I was one of them, that like you can do well in really high pressure legal jobs, but it can wear on you if it's not your thing. For some people it is their thing, and it's beautiful, and I'm happy, and I love that for them, because I don't care where you land as long as you're happy doing your thing. But if it's not your thing, wherever you are, that can wear on you. It can be contagious. It can bleed into all elements of your life. And I'm sure for your parents, like, they see this big smile on your face and you seem like a pretty happy dude. So maybe you always had this smile, but, they're seeing that now, and that probably really helps them feel, like you're in a good spot as well.
Well, man, yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Like they saw some pretty dark times when I was in Biglaw, and that's not because of where I was at per se, but just there's so much pressure and there's so many things that don't feel authentic, and throughout the whole course of my not just Biglaw, but all my corporate history, there's been a lot of pain points, and I think they've seen them, answering those emails on Christmas Eve or whatever, or even Christmas Day. That happened, for the last 4 or 5 Christmases, other than once I started being at, under my own banner and with Goodlawyer. So I think even just seeing that and understanding, wow, like this is not the same Nolan that we had to deal with last, 4 years ago. I think that's very, palpable for them.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. I want to ask you something that's like is a little bit tactical, but I think you're so well placed to do it that I think it might be helpful for people. So, you know, okay, so we've gone through a lot of barriers around can you get cool mandates and work with cool companies and design your career and then you feel better and it can be intentional and you can live a flexible life. And like, let's assume that some percentage of the folks listening are like, I'm still with you. I'm still with you, but I'm making a sweet salary right now. And it's like basically guaranteed. And I want to talk about kind of what I think sometimes can be like a false sense of security in a full-time job, unless you have an incredible like severance package lined up. Like, and even then that's time limited. There's a little bit of a false sense of security. I think we've seen that now over the last 24 months, in the way the US and even in Canada, there's been a bit of a shock to, the way that certain companies and legal teams have contracted down in size. But also I want to talk about the financial element of fractional work. So you have the risk reward of through your own business, you're generating your own clients, or through Goodlawyer, they're serving up opportunities to you. And I want to talk about and get your feeling upon how you started thinking about moving from this top line lifestyle, whether that was, oh, they're billing me out at $500 an hour, $600 an hour, $700, or your top line salary versus what is now, what I think and the way that I feel about my life is much more a bottom line lifestyle. Like I'm very focused on like how much cash though do I get? Not what is the top revenue number or what am I being billed at? I want to know how much I get for myself, my family, my life. That's what I care about. And in between the top line and the cash that goes in your bank is a lot of costs depending on where you are or fewer costs. And so how did you feel about that risk reward change of top line salary versus like net in your bank of running your own business? Was it scary? Was it a hard thing to get over? Was it difficult to do the math?
It is, I think, I'm not a big numbers guy. Taxes every year sort of, give me heart, heart palpitations as well. So I think that would be one thing where get an accountant that is going to do your books for you and sort of explain to you after a couple of years what your financial requirements are and how they line up against, prior years. And I think that helps a lot because it is that first step, that uncertainty of like, oh, if I pull this money out of my corporation, now I'm going to pay tax on it. Like, do I just leave it in there? Like, what do I do? Like, how do I pay my credit? I think all those questions are very real questions. But if you're looking for 100% certainty and jumping off off the ledge once you know what everything looks like, I think you're not going to make that jump. I think some of it is sort of figuring it out as you go. And I think the benefit is like if you think about, I think at a certain point, if you're in private practice, you're thinking about how much you're billing out at, and you're like, oh yeah, like I'm billing out at $800 an hour. And you always have to ask the question, like, what are you taking home from that $800 an hour that you're billing? And, if you're talking to a mid-level associate, it's probably 1% of that, of that billing. So I think thinking about in terms of that, in time management and how many hours a day that you want to work, you can kind of build out exactly what you're prepared to take on and how much risk you're prepared to live with. Right. So,
I used to think about
luckily,
that as a salaried employee, as a GC too. Is that like you're making a nice salary number, but then I would think about like the quantum of like effort and time I was putting into it as a full time
yeah.
employee. And I was like, that take home on a cash in my bank hourly rate is like, it's not incredible. You do feel like you have this certainty, which isn't, there's no certainty really in
No.
full-time employment either, unless you're in like, super unionized environment, or you have like somehow you got a 24-month severance in your severance package, which like doesn't exist these days. So, the way that I started thinking about it was like, I was talking to a lawyer who was up for new into coming into the fractional world, and they were used to like a certain salary or being billed out at like $600 an hour. And the take home rate on this mandate was like, for the lawyer was something like, it was at the lower end, something like, I don't know, $150 an hour. And I think it broke their brain. They were like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm going to be taking home $150 an hour. This is wild. No chance. And I said, whoa, pump the brakes. Before, you would have been cool if your firm was billing you out at $500 an hour, $600 an hour, and you were taking like less than 10% or whatever it was. Now just run the math. So for 1 day a week, so for 8 hours times by $150 times by 4 weeks, like in these mandates, you can easily get five, seven, 10, $12,000 a month working like a day a week. And so I started explaining to this person, I was like, so hold on. So for a day a week, over a year, you could get like 50, 70, $80,000. Like, do you want to put like 3, 4, 5 of those together? Like, this is more money than you're making as an employee. And I just really think that math, we were never taught that in law school. We were never taught that as lawyers. And I just think that financial literacy, which is so basic when you actually break down the math, we were just never taught. And I think it really matters because that's called like money in your bank account, not money that people are telling you they're billing you out at. And I just think it's such a massive difference.
It really is, but I don't think anybody thinks of it that way because they're so enamored by how high that hourly rate is, and they sort of ascribe their value artificially to this number that is artificial and that nobody can afford or pay reasonably, and so I think, yeah, it's sort of just dislodging yourself from that traditional mindset and sort of bizarre concepts of value attribution. I think is sort of it takes a couple of steps for sure.
Yeah, I think it's like it's really doing the math. Another thing that I tell people too when they're like thinking about making a big transition in their career and going from full-time employment to a fractional lifestyle is a big change. What I tell people is, so for anyone listening, contemplating, hey, like Chad did this thing, Nolan's doing this thing, what does it look like to me? What I tell them is like between the top line number and the bottom line number is your life. These are the cost bases. What kind of life really matters to you? What do you really value? And if you're happy in your work, what costs can come out of your life? I think of things like luxury, convenience, and vice. Those things go up typically when we're less happy, right? And
Yeah.
so, like, I give the example to people that say, "Hey, do you like a nice beach destination? Whether that's like for you Hawaii or South America, whatever it is. We're like these are expensive trips to take, expensive bottom line trips. In Toronto, we've got this area called the Beaches that is like 15 minutes from where I live, and it's like very beautiful. No one believes it's even in Toronto. And what I say now with my partner is like, I can be as happy or happier when we go there with our daughter for the day because I feel great about the life that I'm building and I feel like proud of it and it's very meaningful to me. And then if we had to take a whole bunch of money and dump it into a trip to Greece so that we could tell each other, yeah, we're good. Yeah, we're good. And so I always tell people who are going through this transition is like, what are the big cost items where if you felt better, you wouldn't need them? Have you ever felt like as you're making this transition, you're like, oh, now that I feel better, like I can adjust my cost base if I don't want to like take on a mandate or I want to take like 3 weeks off and go travel. And like, do you do that math for yourself where you're like, okay, well, I can just adjust this now if I want to like take some more time for myself or do this cool trip?
I think I'm fortunate in that, I didn't have to take a hit really at all in terms of transitioning from the careers that I was in previously. So like going on to Goodlawyer, I'm making just as much as I was making sort of at my high line, and so that makes it a lot easier of a step, I think, in that sense. And again, fortunate maybe because of that I haven't really had to worry too much about having to drop mandates or rejig around if I lose one month, do I need to like make accommodations or draw on this account? Like it's pretty comfortable, I think, for me. So I'm fortunate in that sense. But I do agree. I think like I do remember when I was in those other prior roles, just dying for that 1 or 2 weeks that I could take a year, and even those I felt guilty about taking. But then when I did take it, you're spending money out the nose, and you're like just can't even look at your phone, and like it's just this really awful, terrible experience, right? And so, yeah, I think now I see life in a lot more holistic way. I see it sort of as, hey, I got to work today, but I also can go to the beach, or I'm going to go to Mexico and work for a couple hours from there, and take some meetings from the beach there. I think it just changes your perspective on work-life balance, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's because you feel like you're choosing it more versus you feel like it's being thrust upon you, right? Because the risk reward is like you're choosing the revenue as it makes sense for like your cost of living, your lifestyle, the mandate if it's really exciting to you, or the client that comes to you if you feel very passionately about their work. I feel like there's a lot of choice there. And for people that feel like they have that choice in their full-time employment, I also think that's beautiful. It's not like there's a better outcome. I think there's a better outcome for each person. And I think the point of what we're trying to do through this podcast is like show that there's lots of ways to do this. Like last episode, we had Angie Jackson and Pam Hinman, and so Angie Jackson, has been in Goodlawyer as a good lawyer, and now she's director of legal at Uber. So there's no like better way to do it, or like Pam Hinman is a client. So there's like value in all ways, in all roles. I think the magic of what we're trying to bring out here is like, how do you make that decision for yourself so that it feels right for you in that phase of your life, and so that you don't just get carried away by the river and the stream, because it's fast moving water, and it's really hard to pull yourself out of it when you're not thinking about it. And so for you, as you think about like this next phase of your career, like what feels like the future for you? What's most meaningful to you? What's on your mind? Where do you want to take your career?
Yeah, I think about all the ways that what I'm currently doing satisfies or fulfills, my core values. And I think the one thing that maybe potentially feels missing or lighter is that sort of collegiality. Because yeah, Good Lawyer has a great platform and has a fantastic community of lawyers to connect with. It's still sort of an online concept, right? And so having those meetups in person, I think is something that I still sort of crave, and I'm excited that the Good Lawyer guys are trying to facilitate that more. And so I think the future ideally looks a lot like what I'm currently doing, but hopefully more of that, more seeing what it's like to. We're all sort of part of a team, but we're not sort of marching, I guess, in the same jurisdiction at this point. So once that sort of falls into place, I think it's going to be such a impossible thing to say no to. Like it's going to be exactly what I want from a career.
Yeah, I think you're right. And we've seen that a lot, I think, post COVID, where people are really craving like the human connectivity and just learning about other people's journeys and what they're going through and what they're feeling and seeing. And there's just this desire to like be around other people and find community that way. And yeah, I know that, Brett and the Good Lawyer folks, like they put on an incredible number of events each
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
And so, for folks that are interested in the platform, or maybe you have a need for fractional services, like there's lots of cool events that we'd love to meet you at. And also we've got on the virtual side of it, we've got the Future of Law Summit coming up. Actually, we're recording this in 6 days. I'm co-hosting it with Pauline Chan of Good Lawyer in Calgary. Unfortunately, Nolan, you're not going to be in Calgary. I'm coming all the way
Yeah.
there. And then you just run away from me as soon as I come there.
I
What are
wish I
you
could
doing?
be
You're
there.
going west. You're going west, even further west.
And there you go. Yeah, no, I with the flexibility of my life these days, I'm able to spend, longer lengths of time up with my parents on Vancouver Island. So, spent a month with them this summer, and I'm driving out to spend a couple weeks with them now. So just in Vancouver
Oh,
now, and
that's
then going to
beautiful.
make the rest of the journey to spend a couple weeks with them.
Nice, man. That's amazing. Well, I hope you have an amazing time. Too bad you can't be in Calgary when we're there, but we will make sure to make it happen next time. And for anyone that is looking for more ideas about how to figure out what they really care about, find community, figure out what technology actually makes sense for their career, Future of Law Summit, November 21, Guy Kawasaki, the chief evangelist of Apple in the like 80s and 90s, and the chief evangelist of Canva over the last 10 years,
Crazy.
is our keynote speaker. Had a panel prep call with him. He is as lovely and warm and thoughtful and inspiring as he is in his TED talk, and as he is in every book that he's written. So we've got an incredible number of speakers. They're all like the leading voices. If you're ever on LinkedIn, you'll know all of these faces. And it's going to be an incredible day. So I hope that we can see you all there. Summit.goodlawyer.ca. You'll see our faces there. Would love to see you. It's free. It's virtual. 4 hours of free CLE. So, nothing, no barriers, my friend.
Hard to say no to that. Yeah.
Yeah, tough to say no to that. That'll be the title. Tough to say no to this. Yeah, listen, Nolan, I'm just really happy for you that you've built this career. You had the courage and bravery to build something that's so meaningful to you, and appreciate you for sharing your reflections and insights on like what's an incredible journey, and hope that you have an amazing time with your parents. And hopefully we'll get this episode ready so you can all listen to it together, and your warm shout outs to them.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chad. It's been a pleasure.
Cool, Nolan. All right, chat soon. And everyone, thanks so much for listening. On the next episode after this, hopefully we've got some cool clips and cuts from the amazing panels that we're going to have from the summit. So thanks everyone for listening to season 2 of the What You're About podcast. See you next time.